Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, first up is Olivier. Let me see who I need to let in for this. I'm assuming you sent your email, Matthew.
I did earlier this morning.
All right, hold on. Let me open up my email. Here we go. Zachary Robinson. Okay, let me get him in. Peter, would you pull this off the printer for me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I've got, let's see, a few other folks in the waiting room. Joy Jennings, Caitlin Miller, and an unidentified device. Are we expecting any parents?
I don't think my client's going to show up. That would be Mommy, the one who's in Texas, I think.
All right, let me just find out who this is, and I'll put a name with it. And thanks, Peter.
Yep.
It looks like the father on Dakota Johnson, Your Honor.
Oh, okay. Let me get, as soon as he gets in, I'm going to plug his name in. Okay, sir, what is your name?
My name is Ronnie Johnson, Dakota Riley's father.
All right, hold on. I'm going to put your name with your device and put you back in the waiting room.
Okay,
We're not quite ready for your case.
alrighty. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Okay, looks like everyone's here then. Could each of you identify yourselves for the record? And this is the matter of the Olivier minors.
Matt Way, Prosecutor's Office.
Zachary Robinson, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Ellie on behalf of the mother.
Ivan Brown on behalf of Dirk Gunter, father.
Ken Hotchkiss, lawyer, guardian ad litem.
So I know that one of the things we do need to accomplish today is to adjudicate as to Nevaeh. I know we had some ongoing discussions as to how to proceed with Zachary and Brandon. What is your pleasure today, Mr. Way?
Your Honor, could I just inquire of Mr. Robinson a couple things?
Go right ahead.
Mr. Robinson, is it your understanding that the mother, father, and the two boys are in another state at this point?
Correct.
Has the agency made attempts to get a case opened up in that other state?
We have. When we first learned that they were possibly in Texas, we made calls down there. And now we believe they're in Alabama. So we've also made calls to the CPS intake down there as well.
Okay. And is it based on that, the priority would be to get Nevaeh proper care and custody and kind of figure out the other two boys outside of court? Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. I'm ready to proceed. Given that, Your Honor, it would just be my intention to call Mr. Robinson as a witness cover what's going on with Nevaeh, and the court would be able to release the two boys from jurisdiction in the event that they're found in another state and the other state deems it appropriate to take jurisdiction of them.
Fair enough. Mr. Robinson, would you raise your right hand, please? You do swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your full name, please,
Zachary Bruce Robinson,
and then spell that, please.
ZACHERYBRUCEROBINSON.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Way.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Robinson, you are an investigator with Child Protective Services, is that correct?
Correct.
And did you file the petition in this case on or about 10/16 of 2020?
That is correct.
At the time you filed the petition, was Nevaeh Olivier, date of birth 3/5/2010, found here in Jackson County?
She was.
And she has a putative father named Jonathan Williams, is that correct?
That is correct.
And her mother is Jacqueline Olivier, date of birth 5/18/1987?
Correct.
You got involved due to some concerns with the family, is that fair to say?
That is correct.
During your investigation, what did you find out about Nevaeh?
So during the investigation, I found out that Nevaeh had been living with her maternal grandmother since the children were returned home from a prior removal that the family was involved in. And that had been roughly a year that Nevaeh had been living with her grandmother.
And during your investigation, and I guess since you concluded your initial investigation, is it fair to say that Ms. Olivier has left the state of Michigan?
That is correct, on multiple occasions.
Has she taken Nevaeh with her?
She has not.
Is Nevaeh in any sort of guardianship?
She is not. Her grandmother has filed for guardianship, but that is still pending.
Is there any sort of more permanent legal recourse in place for her grandmother to take care of Nevaeh if something were to happen to her?
Currently, no. Jacqueline has refused to sign a power of attorney for her mother, for Nevaeh.
And given that, do you believe Nevaeh is without proper care, custody, or guardianship?
I do.
I have nothing further, Your
Uh,
Honor.
questions from any counsel?
Honor.
Oh, Your
Yes.
Honor.
When was the request for guardianship filed?
That was filed on December 22nd.
And do you know whether a DHS worker has been assigned to investigate that home?
Yes, sir. The current ongoing worker, Sabrina Beitelcheese, has been assigned to complete a home assessment and submit a court report to the court.
Okay, do you know whether she's began that process or not?
I am not sure if she has began that process. I believe that she is on vacation due to the holidays. However, I know that she has been involved with Miss Wilson, who is the grandmother to Nevaeh.
Have you ever been involved in the guardianship process in other cases? Not a juvenile guardianship, court-ordered epic guardianship?
Myself, no.
Okay. Thank you, Judge. Nothing further.
Any questions, Mr. Hotchkiss?
No questions. Thank you.
Counsel, can we dispense with arguments?
I just have a brief argument.
Okay. Go ahead.
Seeing that Miss Olivier, I believe that is still her name, or Miss Wilson, has filed for guardianship, rather than this court taking jurisdiction, at the last hearing, the court put in its order that a maternal grandmother may file for guardianship. I guess at this point, that she has filed for guardianship. I would assume this case would be assigned to this court, that the court could sign an interim temporary guardianship for Miss Wilson, since she's had custody of the children before. Children were placed with her before by this court. I don't see the need for the court to take jurisdiction of Nevaeh. The court can use another mechanism pending final guardianship through the court. We can sign a temporary guardianship, giving her the authority to get medical treatment rather than this court taking jurisdiction. Thank you.
Peter, would you bring me the files that are on the end of my counter? If I had an application for temporary guardianship in front of me and could this morning sign it, I would be sympathetic to your argument, Mr. Brown. If I do not, this child, clearly by the testimony, is without proper care and custody. And I've got a parent who's refusing to sign a simple power of attorney, which could have avoided this court taking jurisdiction. A parent that has left the state and has left this child in the care of someone else without providing that person with the ability to make emergency decisions for the child. This child is in jeopardy right now. So I am just seeing whether a request has been submitted to me, and it has not. So for that reason, had something been in place prior to today, or even if I could enter something today, but it's not. The evidence clearly establishes that this child is without proper care and custody. Based upon the testimony, I am going to take jurisdiction over Nevaeh only. We will. Well, and let me ask you, Mr. Way, are you asking me to dismiss today as to the other two children?
I think that is fine, Your Honor. We can always refile if it's necessary.
Okay. Any objection to that?
No.
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. We will set. I guess disposition is simple. Get a guardianship in place. We're not going to be able to service the family. Any objection to me entering an order of disposition that provides that a guardianship order be entered as to Nevaeh?
No objection.
Your Honor.
Your Honor.
And you can take me, I spoke too soon. Mr. Gunther is not the father of Nevaeh. So I guess my representation with regard to Nevaeh and my argument previously was unwarranted.
Okay. So let's set a dispositional review hearing in 3 months, approximately, under 90 days. Can you find me a date, Tasha?
At 90 days.
Yeah, just under 90 days. Looks like March 23rd would
I was
be,
just gonna say March 16th.
that works. March 16th at, let's set it for 10 a.m.
Do you do reviews every week?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
so March 16th at 10 a.m. If an order of guardianship is entered, court will dismiss and there'll be no need for a review hearing. Thank you all.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Okay, next up. Is Dakota Johnson. Let me let everyone in. Okay, looks like we've got everyone in now for the matter of Dakota Johnson. Can I have each of you identify yourselves for the record?
Matt Way, Prosecutor's Office.
Joy Jennings, Jackson DHHS.
Kelly MEF with a mother.
Rebecca McCluskey for Ronnie Johnson.
Ivan Brown, LJ.
Ronnie Johnson, Dakota Riley Johnson's father.
Caitlin Miller, Lifeways therapist.
Okay, and Mr. Way, how are we proceeding this morning?
Your Honor, I'm prepared to proceed. I haven't heard from the parents' attorneys though.
On behalf of Mr.
eh.
Johnson, we're prepared to proceed. Thank you.
Your Honor, I've spoken with Ms. Clemens and we're prepared to move forward.
Fair enough. Anything preliminary?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your
I
Honor.
would ask the court to take judicial notice of the file. Thank you.
I will do so. Thank you. Call your first witness, Mr. Way.
I would call Caitlin Miller.
Ms. Miller, would you raise your right hand, please? You do swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your full name for the record and then spell it, please.
Caitlin Miller, KATELYNN MILLER.
Go ahead, Mr. Way.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Miller, how are you employed?
I'm a therapist through Lifeways Community Mental Health.
And how long have you been with Lifeways?
Well, I've been with Lifeways since January of 2018.
How long have you been a therapist?
I've been a therapist at Lifeways since August of 2018.
Okay. And do you have some sort of education that led you to Lifeways?
Yes, I have my master's in counseling.
Through your employment at Lifeways, are you familiar with a Dana Clemens?
Yes, I am.
And how are you familiar with Ms. Clemens?
I've been assigned to be her therapist.
And how long have you been assigned to Ms. Clemens?
Since the beginning of 2020.
How did you receive a referral for Ms. Clemens?
Yes, I received a referral through our access department.
And when you begin a counseling relationship with a client, do you often receive some information as to what's going on in their life and what they need to work on?
I do. They do a whole intake process.
Okay, have you communicated throughout Ms. Clemens' case with Joy Jennings from the Department of Health and Human Services?
I have.
And has Ms. Jennings provided you information on what Ms. Clemens needs to work on?
Yes, she has.
And so what were the identified areas of concern and the goals that you and Ms. Clemens developed in order to help her out?
Yeah, from Joy, the identified areas were like interpersonal relationships, concerns with parenting, concerns with domestic violence in the home. And then Dana and I had talked specifically, she wanted to really work on her interpersonal relationship skills.
Was Ms. Clemens consistent with counseling with you?
She was not consistent, no.
And can you explain exactly what you mean by that?
She would often make an appointment and then reschedule it or no show.
Do you know approximately how many appointments she did maintain?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I know that I sent that information to Joy, but I would say maybe half.
Okay. Do you still have a therapeutic relationship with Ms. Clemens?
I am still assigned to her case. It is still open to Lifeways, but I have not seen her since the end of October.
When she has come to your sessions, how have they gone?
Dana struggled to engage. She would be open some days and other days it would be very guarded, or she would say that things were going well and she didn't feel like talking.
Do you feel that you were able to make progress with her on the goals that were identified between what information you had from DHS and what areas Ms. Clemens herself wanted to work on?
I feel like there was a small amount of progress in building our relationship, which was good for her opening up, but I don't feel like she made any significant progress on her goals, no.
Do you have any specific concerns with Ms. Clemens based on what you've observed, witnessed, experienced in your sessions with her?
Dana really struggles with her interpersonal relationships, and often identifies herself in the romantic relationship that she is in, which causes her not to be able to seem to function independently.
Would you have any concerns about that, what you've characterized in terms of her ability to parent?
I do have some concerns, just because Dana is so focused on her relationship. And I've never seen her really talk about parenting skills.
Is that something that you tried to talk to her about, or was your focus just elsewhere initially?
Her focus was elsewhere initially. There were times that we talked about her kids, but she never really fully engaged in those conversations.
Okay, and when you so I guess you've talked about how she was very focused on her romantic relationships. Was that with Ronnie Johnson?
At the beginning of therapy, it was, and then at the end, she had a different significant other.
Are you also familiar with Ronnie Johnson?
I am.
And did you have a therapeutic relationship with Mr. Johnson?
I did.
When did that begin?
The beginning of 2020 as well.
And what were the issues that you were and goals you had for Mr. Johnson?
Very similar. From Joy, it was working on interpersonal skills, parenting, DV. And then Ronnie himself really wanted to work on his anxiety and interpersonal relationships, along with talking about parenting.
And was Mr. Johnson consistent with therapy?
Yes, more so. He did struggle at the beginning. We had a lot of no-shows. I'd probably say it was about half. But again, Joy has those actual numbers. I apologize.
Okay, we can get to that later. So when Mr. Johnson did attend therapy, how did those sessions generally go?
Ronnie was very engaged during therapy. He expressed that he liked coming to therapy. We worked on coping skills, talked about his relationships. He was very open pretty much from the start.
Did you have any, well, when's the last time that you had a session with Mr. Johnson?
The very beginning of this month. I think it was the 1st of December.
Okay, and are you still working? Is he still a client of yours?
He is not. When he moved, we could not keep his case in Jackson anymore.
Okay. Did you, at the time that that relationship ended, did you have any concerns regarding Mr. Johnson's, I guess his overall mental health?
At the time that he moved, the last time we talked, I had seen a lot of progress actually, doing much better with his anxiety, using his skills. He and I had talked about like the things that he had placed if he was to get to Dakota and how he would move forward with parenting and providing. So he had made a lot of progress at that time.
So what did you see as kind of those next steps for Mr. Johnson being able to reunify with his child?
Yeah, I think that staying in therapy is really going to be very helpful for him to have that additional support. Because while he had his coping skills, I think that if he doesn't have that additional support, that it may become too much of a stress if he didn't have that continued support.
Did you see any progress with Mr. Johnson in terms of the interpersonal skills and developing those?
Based on my last session with him, yes. I had been concerned he had gotten into a relationship. And then he talked about it and he said that he'd broken it off. We had discussed it. He had talked about the things that he wanted Dakota to see and the things he didn't want Dakota to see. And they were all very positive things.
What were the things that he did not want Dakota to see?
Arguing, domestic violence, any of those negative attributes in relationships.
And did he discuss at all and work through at all the previous domestic violence concerns that had been present?
We did. We did talk about that. Ronnie talked about how he had experienced it in his childhood and how he did not want to see Dakota experience that at all, and was able to note like the things that he experienced and why he didn't want Dakota to go through it.
So Ms. Miller, how you mentioned that you think it would be beneficial for Mr. Johnson to continue with therapy. I know sometimes timeframes are difficult to give, but if he was engaged with therapy in the way that he was with you, how long would you have anticipated I guess continuing with Mr. Johnson in a therapeutic setting?
Oh, had I been? Probably if he had continued to make the progress he was making, 3 to 4 months, depending on if it was weekly or every other week.
At your I don't have any further questions for you, Ms. Miller. I think some of the other attorneys may though, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Kelly?
Based upon my conversations with my client, I've had so far, Your Honor, and her today, I would have no questions of this witness. Thank you.
And I lost track of who represents Mr. Johnson.
That would be me, Your Honor, Rebecca.
Questions, Ms. McCluskey?
Just two quick questions. Ms. Miller, what month did my client engage in therapy with you, if you remember? Which month?
I don't remember. It was early 2020. I know it was before we left the office for telehealth, so it was before March.
Okay.
It was probably February.
Okay, I apologize. I missed the question that Mr. Way asked you when you said your guess would be 3 to 5 months. What was that an answer to?
If Ronnie had been making the same progress that he had been making when I was seeing him, I would say probably 3 to 5 months, depending on if it was weekly or every other week that he would need to continue in therapy.
Oh, okay. All right. No further questions. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. Who's LGAL? Mr. Brown?
Yes, Ms.
Okay.
Miller, did Mr. Johnson indicate to you why he up and moved to Tennessee, I believe, with his child in care and doing fairly well in therapy?
Why he moved to Georgia?
Yes.
Yes, we talked about that actually at quite some length. And he said that he felt that he was not making the progress he wanted to in Michigan and that he would be better supported in Georgia.
Did you try to talk with him that with this case going here in Michigan, that may not be such a good idea?
We did have that conversation, yes.
Okay, so he wasn't receptive to your suggestions that if he wanted his child, that it'd be more beneficial to stay here and continue working.
Based on the conversation Ronnie and I had, he still felt he would be more supported in Georgia.
Okay, thank you, Judge. Nothing further.
Any redirect, Mr. Way?
Just one question. Ms. Miller, what were the concerns that Mr. Johnson had regarding his progress, the progress that he was making in Michigan?
Oh, the support, like lack of social support that he had, not having like family support here as much as he felt like he would have in Georgia.
And what is the support that he believes that he has in Georgia?
He calls them his adoptive family, and it sounds like they're pretty close family. Sounds like they give him a lot of emotional support, and also just, being able to go over there and be with them when he needs to.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further.
Any further questions for this witness?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Miller. You may leave if you wish. You're welcome to stick around.
Thank you.
Next witness, Mr. Way.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would call Ms. Jennings to the stand.
Ms. Jennings, would you raise your right hand, please? You do swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name and spell your last name, please.
Joy Jennings, Jennings.
Go ahead, Mr. Way.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Jennings, you are the foster care worker for Dakota Johnson, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you file the supplemental petition in this case?
Yes.
At the time you filed the petition, was everything true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
This court, or I guess Dakota was removed a little over a year ago from her parents, is that correct?
Yes.
And what were the concerns that led to the removal?
Mrs. Clemens still had an active foster care case in Calhoun County. She had recently released rights to 2 of her children, and it was in progress for a guardianship for the other. For Mr. Johnson, he had had a previous termination of parental rights in 2014. And for both of them, they had not alleviated the concerns that the court had or completely participated and benefited from previously ordered services. Additionally, they did not have safe or stable housing for Dakota to be with them safely.
And both parents were adjudicated based on at least some of those concerns. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Do you know what happened with the child of Ms. Clemens in another county? Did a guardianship go through in that case?
Yes. It is
Okay.
currently being completed and closed.
Okay. And as a result of the adjudications, both parents, or there was dispositional hearings for both parents, is that correct?
Yes.
Ms. Clemens was ordered to participate and benefit from parenting classes, is that correct?
Yes. That is correct.
Was she referred for those?
Yes, she was referred to Family Services and Children's Aid for the Nurturing Parenting course.
And can you tell us what her participation in those classes were?
Mrs. Clemens did complete the class. She did miss many of them and made up for them later, so it took longer than is typical for parenting courses. She did improve her parenting domains with the pre-test and post-test in 3 areas, and the parenting educator did report that she did engage during the class.
I believe, I don't see it in the, at least in the petition or in what she was ordered to do, but I did see a reference to a psychological evaluation. Was there one done prior to the Jackson case opening?
Yes, she had a psychological with Dr. Haugen in 2018.
And what were the recommendations of that psychological evaluation?
The recommendations were continued substance abuse treatment, doing individual therapy or a DBT program to help her learn how to increase her stress tolerance, manage her emotions, and deal with problems in her life, and to have a psychopharmacological exam for psychotropic medications.
The DBT, that's handled through counseling services, is that fair to say?
Yes, it can be handled through individual counseling.
Was she referred for, or referred to rather, a counselor who could address those issues?
Yes, she was referred to Lifeways, and Lifeways made a recommendation that she complete DBT skills in individual therapy.
And did she participate in those sessions to address those concerns?
Ms. Clemens did participate in individual therapy with Mrs. Miller, who we just heard testify. Ms. Clemens missed or canceled 39% of her therapy appointments and was inconsistent on and off throughout the case. Mrs. Miller previously reported to me that they did not focus heavily on the DBT skills due to the inconsistencies in participation. And Dr. Patel, who was her psychiatrist, continued to recommend that she make progress on those and recommended a DBT skills workbook for her as well.
Okay, and so you mentioned her psychiatrist, which was a recommendation from her psychological evaluation. Was she consistent with those services?
She did miss 50% of her appointments with Dr. Patel. And so Dr. Patel provided recommendations also to her individual therapist to guide her treatment. And that included taking her medications regularly, participating in individual therapy, and including DBT skills in individual therapy.
Okay, so Dr. Patel and Ms. Miller, either directly or indirectly, were communicating about the concerns that there were for Ms. Clemens. Is that what you're saying?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so were Dr. Patel and Ms. Miller either directly or through you communicating regarding the concerns that you had for Ms. Clemens?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. And do you have any sense as to how Ms. Clemens was doing regarding her medications?
My most recent update I have is that she missed her last psychiatric appointment with the doctor, and there were concerns voiced by Lifeways that she was not taking them consistently due to even the timeline of prescriptions that were made and her missed appointments.
And when you say taking them, are you referring to her psychotropic medications?
Yes, not taking them consistently.
Okay. You mentioned that part of the recommendations in her previous psychological evaluation were regarding substance abuse treatment. How was she compliant in that regard?
Mrs. Clemens did complete a substance use assessment at Born Free in February. She was recommended to, due to her sobriety, she was recommended to have her substance use monitored by her therapist and to talk about substance use in individual therapy. More recently, Mrs. Clemens has tested positive for methamphetamine and has disclosed about using methamphetamine on a weekly basis, and she has not discussed this in her individual therapy setting. Ms. Clemens has not been able to receive the support that she needs to be able to work on that, either due to her not discussing it in therapy.
Ms. Clemens was ordered to participate in random drug screens, is that correct?
Yes.
And what has her participation in those been?
Mrs. Clemens has missed a significant amount of drug screens. I'm going to refer to my notes if that's okay.
Would that help refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Go ahead.
She did test positive for a drug screen for THC in January, and she has had 2 positive drug screens for amphetamine and methamphetamine more recently. Ms. Clemens, sorry.
Oh, sure. So how often has she tested negative for illegal substances?
She has tested negative for substances 10 times, but that was before July. Every drug test that she has completed since then has been positive. And she has missed all drug screens since the beginning of November.
Does Ms. Clemens, well, let me rephrase that. When Ms. Clemens did her psychological evaluation, was she diagnosed with any sort of mental illnesses?
Yes, Mrs. Clemens was diagnosed with personality disorder with borderline and antisocial patterns. She also was diagnosed with stimulant use disorder and opioid use disorder, stress-related disorder.
You mentioned that there was a concern when the child initially came into care regarding housing. Do you know the status of Ms. Clemens' housing at this point?
Yes, the current status is that Ms. Clemens is residing with her significant other, Zach Mansfield, in Battle Creek. The housing does not have any safety or sanitary concerns, but due to the instability that she's had over the course of this case, since June, she has lived with 4 different people, and in all cases, she has been evicted from them due to interpersonal relationships. The agency is concerned that she needs to maintain this housing to show that it is stable housing before it would be an appropriate situation for reunification.
What sort of time frame would you like to see in regards to that stability?
I think I would like to see it maintained for at least 2 more months, and for her to show that her relationship with her current significant other is also a stable situation due to this housing being dependent on him.
Is it fair to say that the concerns Ms. Miller raised regarding her interpersonal relationship is also a factor in that?
Yes.
But it's probably fair to say that housing is kind of a secondary concern at this point. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Clemens was also ordered to participate in supervised parenting time. How did that go?
With supervised parenting time, she was pretty consistent near the beginning of the case in participation. More recently, she has been missing parenting times and not shown as much motivation to participate in them or schedule them. She did miss 5 of them between August and October, and more recently, she has missed several. More recently, there was concerns about lice, and she was requested to get her head professionally checked by a doctor or at the health department, and she has not done that. So face-to-face visitation has been put on hold. So she has also lacked motivation in that area to be able to see her son in person. She is also shortened. Sorry.
When is the last time that she saw her son?
I believe it would have been the week of, I think it was November 15th or in that week. She has completed video call parenting times in replacement of the in-person visitation.
When she has participated in visitations, how have they gone?
Visitation is typically supervised by placement as a relative placement. I have supervised several of them. She does a good job trying to engage Dakota and being attentive to his needs. Sometimes she does seem a little bit withdrawn, but typically she tries to stay engaged with him during the parenting times.
How would you describe her bond with Dakota?
I would say right now she does have a weakened bond due to her not having significant in-person visitation with him. I know during especially September to November, Dakota would often not want to go to her, be held by her, and would cry at the beginning of the visit because he wasn't as bonded to her. And I think she would need to make progress on working towards getting back to in-person visitation before reunification would be successful.
Ms. Jennings, what do you see as the barriers for reunification for Ms. Clemens at this point?
I'd say mental health is still a big barrier, as well as her relapse and substance abuse for her. Additionally, I think for her, she still lacks a source of income, and that also leads to her overall stability to be able to care for Dakota.
And what would you like to see, I guess, both in terms of services and progress with services and a time frame before you would be comfortable recommending reunification?
I have made a recommendation to Dana that she complete a new substance abuse assessment due to her changes of levels of use, which Born Free would agree with that based on the recommendation that if her levels of use change, that needed to occur. So I would like to see her complete that and engage in the recommendations of that substance abuse assessment to work towards sobriety. And I would need to see that she can maintain sobriety again from methamphetamine. And I know a lot of times substance abuse can take some time to work towards. So that would take time. Additionally, for mental health, Mrs. Miller reported she was recommending higher levels of intensity program with DBT skills. due to her not making significant progress in outpatient therapy. So she would need to participate regularly in mental health services. I'd say for Dana, it would probably take at least 4 to 6 months to work towards these goals and also be able to reach a place in her mental health where she can find employment and have stability with resources as well.
Let's talk about Mr. Johnson now. Mr. Johnson was ordered to complete a psychological evaluation and follow the recommendations. Did the psychological evaluation occur?
Yes, he completed a psychological evaluation in February of 2020.
And what were the recommendations of that evaluation?
The recommendations, they recommended that he should participate in outpatient substance abuse treatment, which the court did deem that was unnecessary. That he needs therapy that would discuss abuse and neglect, as well as his ability to manage stress and problem solve. And it also recommended that he complete daily therapeutic tasks and journaling exercises to help measure his progress in therapy.
Okay, and I missed, you said that the court deemed that one thing was not necessary. Was that a substance abuse evaluation?
The court recommended that Mr. Johnson follow the recommendations of his substance use evaluation rather than completing intensive outpatient treatment for substance abuse that was recommended in his psychological.
Okay, and did Mr. Johnson complete a substance abuse evaluation?
Yes, he did.
And what were the results of that?
The substance abuse evaluation recommended that he continue to have individual therapy and his substance abuse be monitored by his individual therapist.
Was he also ordered to participate in random drug screens to assess his levels of sobriety?
That's correct.
And how did the drug screens go?
Mr. Johnson has missed or tested positive for 100% of his drug screens. The majority of the positive tests were marijuana, but he also had a positive drug screen for unprescribed Xanax as well.
Oh, one time.
And when did that positive come about?
That was at the end of August.
Of 2020?
Of 2020, yes.
Did you address that positive screen with Mr. Johnson?
Yes, I did talk to him about it, and he had disclosed about using unprescribed Xanax on multiple occasions.
Let me go back to his psychological evaluation real quick, because he said he tested positive for marijuana. Did he have any diagnoses that came from his psychological evaluation?
Yes, he was prescribed with cannabis use disorder, moderate to severe, and also opiate use disorder, moderate, and I believe that was based on his history.
Were there any mental health diagnoses?
Yes, he was diagnosed with personality disorder with mixed features, including borderline pattern, partner relationship problem, generalized anxiety disorder.
I have that too.
You said that he tested, I guess that he hasn't tested negative for all substances, but some of those were marijuana. How often did he miss testing?
He missed or refused, I believe, 47 of 60 drug screens.
Well, I did not have no right to Jackson.
Hold on, Mr. Johnson. You'll get a chance. Right now, we're hearing from this witness.
Ms. Jennings, did you address with Mr. Johnson the issues behind that?
It was discussed regularly, his marijuana use that he should try to stop using. Because the psychological evaluation did mention that it was an issue for him, that he used it essentially as a coping skill to help deal with stress in his life.
Okay, and I probably didn't word that correctly. Did you discuss with him whether there were any barriers to him going to testing?
Oh, yes, I did discuss that with him. He did have transportation as an issue for many of them. He was provided with reserve a ride services, which is the best that the agency could do to try and get him to services. And additionally, I did attempt to drug screen him as often as possible myself by going to him, or I would randomly drug screen him when I knew that I would be meeting with him.
Was he cooperative when you attempted to drug screen him?
For many of them, he was. There was one occasion that he did refuse to drug screen.
Did he indicate why he refused to drug screen?
He did not indicate why he refused. He was very escalated and angry in that situation. So he had refused to do it.
And when did that occur?
I believe that was in February, but it was 2020, but at least it was early 2020 when that occurred.
Okay. Based on your interactions and I guess information you've received, have you had concerns about Mr. Johnson's mental health throughout the case?
Yes, I have had concerns about Mr. Johnson's mental health throughout the case. As Ms. Miller reported on, he has a lot of interpersonal conflict with others, and he has displayed a lot of anger and being overwhelmed easily. He has made threats to Mrs. Clemens and other individuals in her life. He has become easily escalated in situations, displaying outbursts of anger towards myself, towards Mrs. Clemens, towards placement. He has made threats to kill himself in situations, and overall he has displayed just having high anxiety, feeling easily overwhelmed and stressed, mood swings. And it's something that definitely needs to continue to be addressed in therapy. And he needs to have continued mental health services before it would be appropriate for reunification.
Have you seen any progress in that regard with Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Johnson definitely has made progress with his anxiety. I've noticed that he has disclosed that he's doing a lot better about that. He's talked about his anxiety for his coping skills. I'd say he still has progress to make, especially with interpersonal. Just yesterday, he was on the phone with me and was very angry and swearing at myself, swearing about Mrs. Clemens and placement, and just he was stressed and overwhelmed. And I think it just shows that he has continued progress to make, especially as it comes to anger and interpersonal relationships.
What exactly was the nature of your conversation with him yesterday?
Yesterday I was trying to encourage him to keep working towards progress. And he was just very frustrated in general about the termination hearing that was occurring today.
And that's probably not unusual for a parent. Is that fair to say?
I would say it's not unusual, but he definitely was inappropriate with his swearing and yelling.
Sure. What do you, well, okay. Was Mr. Johnson also provided with parenting time?
Yes, Mr. Johnson was provided with parenting time sessions throughout the case.
And has he been consistent in attending those sessions?
He has been mostly consistent throughout the case. He has missed, I think, approximately 8 sessions. He has ended sessions early due to being inappropriate or unprepared for the calls. The situation with parenting time is that he has primarily since March done video call parenting time sessions. And beginning in July, he was offered in-person parenting time, but had difficulty attending those.
And you mentioned that I guess parenting time sessions have been shut down because he was inappropriate. Can you describe the ways in which he's been inappropriate during parenting time?
Yeah, there have been occasions that he had people in the background who were yelling and swearing, or people who were watching the video call. There was a time that he went to the bathroom during a video call parenting time. And when he was corrected, he became angry and hung up the phone. There have been times that it wasn't ended, but he was having an argument in the background of the call for a moment that was addressed.
What was the concern with him going to the bathroom during a parenting time?
He had left his sound and video on with the camera just pointed upwards, and that was inappropriate for being on a video call with his child.
Okay, so he actually had the phone with him while he was going to the bathroom.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. You're not holding it against him that he had to use the bathroom during a parenting time, right?
No. And since then he has said that he needs to go and left the phone, which was okay and appropriate.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that clarification. What do you see as, do you see a bond between Mr. Johnson and Dakota at this point?
I would say that Mr. Johnson definitely cares about Dakota deeply. I'd say that Dakota does not have a strong bond with him. Mr. Johnson only had, I believe, 3 in-person parenting times during the summertime of 2020 when they were highly encouraged and available. And during that time, Dakota was very fussy and didn't seem to be easily comforted by Mr. Johnson. And I'd say that the video call parenting times do help, but they don't help to create a strong bond between the parent and the child. And to add, Mr. Johnson was provided with gas cards and was offered mileage reimbursement to get to the in-person parenting times during the summer of 2020, but they were still oftentimes canceled, unfortunately.
So we heard earlier that Mr. Johnson has moved to another state. Is that correct?
Yes, he has moved to Georgia.
Does that cause concerns for you with reunification?
Yes, it does. Myself and Mrs. Miller had discussed with Ronnie about the importance of him staying in Michigan to be able to maintain a bond with Dakota and be able to see him. Additionally, it is more difficult for the agency to monitor Ronnie and be able to provide him with assistance when he's in Georgia. So it's concerning that he is not able to get as much of the assistance that he needs with in person, and also Dakota does not get to see his father in person to create a bond with him where he can be comforted, where he knows his father.
Ms. Johnson, or Ms. Jennings, excuse me, what do you see currently as the barriers to reunification with Mr. Johnson?
Currently, the barriers that I see is that he does need continued mental health participation. He has not participated in therapy since the 1st of December, and a referral was made on the 28th of October for him to begin services at Legacy Behavioral Health in Georgia, and he's not completed the intake for that. So that kind of sets back his ability to continue participation and maintaining the progress he's made and continuing to make progress. I'd say another barrier would just be resources and housing stability for Ronnie. Additionally, there's still a need for monitoring for domestic violence and substance use, and that would need to be with a new therapist and making sure he maintains stability in those areas as well. I'd say another barrier would be his lack of bond with Dakota. Dakota not seeing him in person for a long time, and just overall his lack of stability.
Does his living out of state create a barrier?
I would say it does. It makes it so he cannot see Dakota in person, and he wouldn't be able to until reunification occurred. And it makes it more difficult to assess his parenting skills. It also makes it more difficult for if reunification were to occur for the agency to monitor the situation for concerns.
Would you need to go through ICPC in order for the reunification process to occur?
Yes, a referral for ICPC would need to occur once Ronnie has a home he intends for reunification, for a home assessment to be completed to ensure that the house is appropriate for reunification, since the Jackson Department of Health and Human Services cannot complete that from a different state.
Okay, but that's something that could be, I guess, planned out in advance, so it wouldn't be something that would be prohibitive. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, although historically ICPC can take up to several months for it to be completed. So there also adds the barrier of that would take a significant amount of time, which might not be reasonable, especially for how long Dakota has been in care.
Where is
Mr. Way? Mr.
Yes.
Way, let me stop you for just a minute. Someone just dialed in to the court hearing. I want to make sure it's not the mother.
Okay.
Good morning. Telephone ending in 3119. What is your name, please?
Selena Radiola.
All right. I just wanted to make sure that you weren't someone involved in the hearing that's going on right now. Give me your name again.
Selena Radiola.
I'm probably going to spell it wrong, but at least I'll have it phonetically. I'm going to put you back in the waiting room.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Sorry about that, Mr. Way. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Jennings, where is Dakota currently placed?
Dakota is currently placed with his maternal grandmother and grandfather. In addition to, he's placed in the same home of his 3 siblings.
And how is he related to the siblings?
They are Dana's other children, so they are half siblings.
Okay. Do you have any concerns for Dakota's care and well-being in that home?
No, Dakota has done very well in the home. He is very strongly bonded, especially with the grandmother, but he also, I've observed a bond between him and his grandfather and his siblings as well.
Have you discussed with the grandparents the difference between guardianship and adoption?
Yes, I have.
Have they expressed a desire one way or another regarding that?
Yes, I discussed in depth with the grandmother, and she reported that she would prefer to do adoption, She would like to see permanency for Dakota in the home and permanency with him being able to stay with his siblings.
And do you feel that that would be an appropriate long-term placement given that he would be with his siblings?
Yes, it would be an appropriate long-term placement for adoption.
Ms. Jennings, do you have an opinion as to what's in the best interest of Dakota as it relates to his mother's and father's parental rights?
I believe that it is in the best interest of Dakota for the parental rights of Ms. Clemens and Mr. Johnson to be terminated. Dakota has been in care for over 12 months now. The parents have not made enough progress where reunification would be appropriate at this time, and could not be achieved within a reasonable amount of time due to the 12 months that have already occurred. Dakota has been placed with his grandparents for a year, and he has a strong bond with them, and he deserves permanency and stability by being adopted by his relatives.
Do you have any concerns that the relatives would keep Dakota safe from his parents if termination took place?
Could you repeat that question?
Do you have any concerns that the grandparents would keep Dakota safe from his parents if termination took place?
I do not have concerns about that. This placement has already adopted Mrs. Clemens' other children. She has spoken with adoption, and she only does appropriate contact with the mother for the other children in the home, and she has displayed the ability to have boundaries with Mrs. Clemens and Mr. Johnson as needed.
I have nothing further at this point, Your Honor.
Any questions, Mr. Kelly?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Ms. McCluskey?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Jennings, so it is possible to assess the appropriateness of Mr. Johnson's housing in Georgia, is it not?
Through ICPC, it would be.
Okay. As for the drug screens, I believe you stated that Mr. Johnson had a positive screen for Xanax. Is that only one positive screen for Xanax?
Yes, he had one positive drug screen for Xanax, but he also disclosed about using it on multiple occasions.
Okay. And any screens for anything else besides THC?
Just THC and Xanax.
Okay. And then I believe you stated that the psych eval diagnosed Mr. Johnson with an opiate use disorder based on his history. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So that diagnosis was not based on his current use?
It was not based on current use. It was based on his history with substances and his risk for use.
And his history that he truthfully reported to Dr. Haugen, correct?
That is my understanding.
Okay. How many times did you attempt to go to Mr. Johnson to screen him?
I believe all but one of the drug screens that were completed were through me drug screening Mr. Johnson.
At his residence?
At his residence or at the agency.
Okay, and how many times was that again?
That would have been 10 occasions with me going to drug screen him.
And that was 10 out of, was he offered 75? Am I correct?
He was offered 60.
Okay, so 10 out of 60, you went to him.
Yes.
Okay, and then I believe at some point your testimony was that you offered him gas cards or gas reimbursement. Is that correct?
Yes, for parenting time.
Oh, okay. Did he have a vehicle?
He reported that his father was able to drive him if he had gas cards or reimbursement.
Okay. You testified that he was usually cooperative with the drug screens, except for one time which you said was February 2020. Is that correct?
It was February 2020 or in that springtime, in the early springtime frame.
Okay. But when you actually could make contact with him to screen, you testified that he was cooperative other than that one time.
That is correct.
Okay. And there were transportation issues when he was unable to screen. Is that correct?
Yes, he did report that he had transportation issues to be able to get to drug screen. The agency did provide reserve a ride services to try and help mitigate that issue.
Okay.
But they were outside of the bus route, or else that would have also been provided.
Okay. So he only refused one, and there were significant transportation issues. Is that correct? Is that a fair statement? Okay. You testified that you observe mental health concerns that are continuing. Was that correct?
Yes.
But you heard Ms. Miller's testimony that he's made a great deal of progress.
Yes.
So what education or certifications allow you to diagnose mental health conditions?
I am not a therapist. I am not diagnosing him. I am just observing that he still has continuing progress to make, as Mrs. Miller also noted, that he would need to continue mental health services.
Correct. And if I understand your testimony, I only heard you referencing some circumstances where he yelled or lost his temper. Is that correct?
Are you talking about more recently?
When you were framing what mental health concerns you were observing?
That was not the only type of mental health concerns I'd observed. There's also been multiple statements related to suicidality. Mr. Johnson has shared about feeling overwhelmed and very anxious throughout the case. He has displayed mood swings where he escalates very quickly, or has discussed about feeling depressed. He also has made threats to other people as well.
And those are very recent?
That was throughout the duration of the case. More recently, things have related to feeling overwhelmed, making state threats to, for instance, in October, he said to Mrs. Clemens that she should go hang herself. He has talked about feeling overwhelmed.
Okay. It's not abnormal for parents to get angry with the agency workers. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. When you said Mr. Johnson was unprepared for parenting time, what does that mean?
When Mr. Johnson's unprepared for parenting times, he either, for instance, one time he was not fully dressed and he needed to put a shirt on. For another instance, he had reported that his phone was dying. Other instances, he has been in public places with bad phone service or with other people. Yeah.
Okay. And then the incident where he used the restroom on camera, you said that was only one time, is that correct?
There was that one time where the sound and video were still on with the camera just tilted upwards. There was another instance reported by placement when she was supervising the parenting times that he
I would
did go to.
That's not responsive to my question, Ms.
Sorry.
Yeah. From your personal observation, the bathroom incident happened one time, correct?
Yes.
And it was your testimony that when he was corrected, the behavior stopped. Was that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And did that one incident affect the 1-year-old child in any way that you personally?
No.
Okay.
But it was concerning based on the appropriateness of the phone call with the child.
Okay. Would you agree that there's not as strong of a bond between Mr. Johnson and Dakota because the agency removed Dakota right after Dakota was born?
I'd say that has impacted the bond, but the lack of face-to-face visits has also impacted that, especially since they've stopped at the beginning of October due to him moving to Georgia.
Okay. But a large majority of those, that lack of face-to-face was due to COVID, correct?
That was from March to July, but since July, face-to-face has been offered to Mr. Johnson on a weekly basis.
Okay. When you were discussing, when Mr. Way was questioning you, you were discussing services in Georgia. You used the words more difficult often, but what services would be impossible to continue if my client remained in Georgia?
Currently, we do not have a contract for drug screening in Georgia, so that would be difficult. I wouldn't say other services would be impossible. What becomes more difficult is the agency's inability to meet with Mr. Johnson in person to monitor his progress and see how he's doing, and to be able to help him get to services or to be able to communicate even with service providers in person.
And I believe that was your testimony. I'll ask the question again. What services are impossible?
I didn't say impossible.
So none. So is the answer none?
I would say none, yes, okay. Except the drug screening.
Okay, but drug screening probably does happen at service providers in Georgia. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, there's just no contract with DHHS to be able to do the drug screening in Georgia.
So if he were able to pay for his own provider and provide you with those results, that would be a solution?
If they were legitimate drug screens that could be testifiable in court, yes.
Okay. And it was your testimony, was it, I'm sorry if it was not yours, but there was testimony that Mr. Johnson has a strong support system in Georgia, is that correct?
That was testified.
Okay. Is it possible that if he had had that support system in Michigan, he would have been even more successful in services?
I'd say it is possible if he had the support system.
Okay. When you were discussing best interests of Dakota, you said the parents have not made enough progress, but it seemed to me Miss Miller's position that my client had made a lot of progress. So is that a yes? Sorry. I'm sorry,
that a question?
That wasn't a question. Did you hear Miss Miller's testimony about the progress my client had made?
Yes.
Okay. So the progress that you believe is lacking is the mental health issues. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay.
It would be his continued need for mental health participation, which has not occurred in the last month.
Do you ever see parents struggle to coordinate services around the holidays?
I have not personally testified to that, but I'm sure that can be a barrier.
So Mr. Johnson engaged in therapy pretty much immediately, correct?
Are you talking about the beginning of the case?
Yes.
They engaged in therapy about a month into the case, and they only participated in I believe he participated in 3 therapy sessions between January and the end of February, before COVID-19 began.
You're saying that Mr. Johnson only engaged in 3 sessions with Ms. Miller?
At the beginning of the case, before it went to phone therapy sessions. You were asking about the beginning, correct?
I guess let me restate. I'm sorry, I was probably confusing. Mr. Johnson engaged immediately after disposition, did he not, with therapy?
He did begin the process of engaging in therapy.
Okay, and from your petition and Ms. Miller's testimony, he was fairly consistent throughout the duration of the case, correct?
He did miss, I believe it was 39% of his therapy sessions. So it was still on and off throughout the case.
Okay. But when our parents are coordinating so many services and appointments and parenting times and employment, that's not abnormal to see. Is that a fair statement?
I am uncertain. I know that with therapy, it is common that some are missed, but therapy was his primary service throughout the duration of the case. So because it was addressing mental health as well as substance use and domestic violence. So I'd say it was very important for him to engage regularly, as well as his psychological evaluation reported that he would need to put in hard work in therapy and be consistent in it.
And from Ms. Miller's testimony, it is clear that he did so, is it not?
He did participate. He has made progress related to his anxiety management and coping skills. That is correct.
In Ms. Miller's testimony, I believe she said that he made progress in most areas, including domestic violence and how that would affect Dakota. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Your petition states that Born Free's position was that Mr. Johnson's mental health was the primary concern above and beyond substance abuse. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So Born Free was not as concerned with substance abuse. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that is fair to say based on the recommendations.
Okay. And again, Mr. Johnson was engaged with Ms. Miller until he moved to Georgia, which was only less than 4 weeks ago. Is that correct?
Mr. Johnson moved to Georgia. Sorry, that was really loud. Mr. Johnson left for Georgia at the very end of September, and he disclosed that he was staying in Georgia around, I believe it was the end of October. And at that time is when their Lifeways case management and myself worked together to begin setting up Ronnie for therapy services in Georgia, which I believe it was October 28th was when a referral was made that he should begin setting up services with Legacy, as services with Lifeways would have to end soon.
Okay.
So he has had 2 months to begin setting up his services with Legacy.
Okay. And when's the last time you asked him if he has done so?
Yesterday.
Okay. And just for clarity, and this is my last question, he still did engage with Ms. Miller until December 1st per her testimony. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
So there hasn't been a lag in therapy for, only less than 4 weeks now?
It has been a month. That's correct.
Okay. All right. No further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Brown, any questions?
Just two. Ms. Jennings, Mr. Johnson's relatives live here in Michigan, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I know from the reports that his parents live in Albion. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What support system in Georgia supersedes his support systems here in Michigan?
As Ms. Miller mentioned, he has friends in Georgia, which he calls his adoptive family. I do have concerns about that, as Mr. Johnson has shared that they are able to help him in a limited capacity because they are also struggling, and they can emotionally support him, which I think is really good for him, but they can't always help him with resources.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Way, any redirect?
I do. I don't know if Mr. Kelly has any questions, though, Your Honor. No.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I asked him first.
Oh, maybe you did. Okay. I saw him
I'm pretty
shake his
sure he
head.
did.
So, okay. Ms. Jennings, the marijuana issue, do you know whether Mr. Johnson is prescribed the THC medically or whether it's recreational use?
It is recreational use. He has not been given a medical marijuana card.
I can buy medical marijuana legally from a dispensary.
Hold it. Mr. Johnson, it's not your turn. You'll get a chance.
Sorry.
Ms. Jennings, I just want to be clear on the timeline. Mr. Johnson moved to Georgia at the end of September to help his emotional support system, but you've also seen outbursts since then, as recently as October. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Ms. McCluskey talked to you about coordinating appointments. You refer in the petition to a case manager that he had through Lifeways. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And case managers are designed to help coordinate appointments. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And he wasn't attending drug screens, was he?
What time are you talking about?
I thought you testified he only went to a handful of drug screens that weren't provided directly by you. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So he wasn't actually attending the majority of his drug screens. What other services did he have besides counseling?
So he did participate in the case management, which included setting up psychiatric services, peer support services. They also attempted to do assisted employment services with Mr. Johnson. Other services were he completed the substance use evaluation. Referrals were made for, in relation to domestic violence, were made to multiple places, initially for couples counseling and then also for addressing domestic violence, but those were not used or needed. Additionally, he has had assistance being provided information about housing resources that he could utilize as well.
And he was provided a resource in order to coordinate what services he had, correct?
Could you say that one more time?
He was provided with assistance in order to coordinate the services that he did have to complete, correct?
I'm just going to make sure I heard you correctly. He was provided assistance to complete services he needed.
And coordinate the different services, correct?
Case management did assist with coordinating some services.
Okay. Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Any further questions from anyone else?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, I'm assuming that completes your presentation, Mr. Way?
It does, Your Honor.
All right, and Ms. McCluskey, I'm assuming that you're going to have a presentation, is that correct?
I would just tell my client, Mr. Johnson, Your Honor.
All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a break. I need a break. I've got some other stuff that was scheduled at 10. I don't think any of them are going to take very long. I'd like to get those folks on their way. And then once I'm done with those, I'll bring everyone back and we'll hear from Mr. Johnson and any further testimony that may be necessitated. You folks are welcome to remain in the meeting room. I'm going to mute your microphone, but as soon as we're able to resume, we will do that. I'm sure we'll be able to finish this morning. But I'm going to take about a 10-minute break right now, and then we will come back on the record and handle the 10 o'clock matters that I have.
I'd love to talk to you right now. Hey, you tried. Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
That would be the stretch, right? Here's the appointments for, okay, so I put them in the file. Matt sent them to me.
Oh, okay.
So I wrote down the attorneys on a sticky for you.
All right, thank you.
how's your hip been?
It's been grand.
Grand?
Exercise is enough, but, it's great.
Well, I'm sure you have a basketball court at your house. You haven't been playing basketball?
No. Although I was reminded we could have run down to our church when I had all my grandkids here. Probably would have been a good thing
Oh,
to
Expend
some energy.
Yeah.
They always get lots of sugar
Oh, yeah.
at Nana's house
Yeah.
that they don't get at their mom's house. And
Oh, so they haven't built up the tolerance.
oh man,
Yeah.
they can get
Double whammy.
they can get wound up.
Yeah.
All right, as soon as I get my coffee, I'll head back in.
All righty.
Okay, let's see. All right, let's do the, it looks like we've got all pretrial scheduled now.
Here we go.
Let me pause the live stream and put everyone except the attorneys